The relay clicked behind the liquor shelves at 11:43 p.m., a dry mechanical snap almost buried beneath the wind pressing against Breaker Point's old terminal windows. Rowan Keene stopped polishing the same glass she had been holding for 12 seconds and looked past the bottles toward the sealed service panel on the wall. 3.8 seconds later, Commander Everett Sorn's radio issued a clipped warning about unauthorized movement near runway 9. That came through twice. The contractors at the far end of the bar kept talking, their voices low and expensive, while rain traced silver lines down windows built when the airfield still handled patrol aircraft. Sorn turned from them slowly, one hand resting beside a leather folder marked with the insignia of Halden Aeronautics. A silver tab protruded from its edge, stamped Post-Service Transition, Draft. His expression carried the practiced patience of an officer forced to acknowledge someone beneath his concern. "What did you say?" Rowan set the glass down without sound. She was 43, compact, dark-haired, and listed on the civilian roster as a night shift bartender with prior maritime support service. Her gray shirt had no ribbons, no unit patch, and no reason for anyone in the room to look at her twice. "The relay behind the wall fired before your radio," she said. Sorn glanced toward the service panel, then at the two junior officers seated near the emergency exit. Neither moved. The wall clock above the register advanced by 1 second, paused, then jumped forward 4. "Old building," Sorn replied. Rowan reached beneath the counter and pressed the mechanical receipt key. The printer stamped the time onto a narrow strip of paper, its internal clock isolated from the airfield network because no one had bothered replacing it. She tore off the receipt and placed it beside the glass. 23 hours, 43 minutes, and 16 seconds. The delay was 3.8 seconds. One contractor smirked into his drink. Lieutenant Caro, the youngest officer in the room, studied Rowan with the embarrassed concern reserved for civilians who had mistaken proximity for authority. Outside, a rotating beacon washed the flooded apron in pale green. Then darkness, then pale green again. Sorn closed the distance to the bar. "You serve drinks here, Miss Keene." Rowan looked past him toward the black window, facing the radar tower. A red maintenance light had appeared halfway up the structure, although the tower log posted near the register showed no work scheduled until Monday. "And you were waiting for the second signal," she said. The room tightened around the sentence. Sorn's face did not change, but his right thumb pressed once against the edge of the Halden folder. Then he reached across the counter and pointed at the small security monitor beneath the shelves. "Disconnect that camera." Rowan folded the receipt in half. "It records automatically after a warning tone." Sorn's hand struck her across the face with the flat precision of someone accustomed to having witnesses reinterpret what they saw. The glass beside her trembled, but did not fall. Rowan absorbed the impact, turned her head back, and placed the folded receipt beneath the register drawer. No one spoke. Sorn ordered Caro to seize the recording, then told the contractors the bartender had become confused by storm interference. Rowan watched Caro approach the monitor, watched Sorn avoid looking at the clock, and heard the relay inside the wall click a second time. This time, she began counting before anyone else knew there was something to count. Caro reached beneath the shelf for the camera lead, but the storm had already forced the terminal onto backup power, and the monitor stayed lit after the first cable came free. Its image narrowed into gray bands, then recovered with a timestamp that lagged the mechanical receipt clock by exactly 3.8 seconds. Rowan noticed the difference, then noticed something less certain. The red light on the radar tower blinked at a steady 6-second interval, while the relay inside the wall answered on no visible pattern at all. Her first assumption, that the two were directly linked, was wrong or incomplete. "Remove her access badge," Sorn said. The order was delivered to Caro, not to Rowan, as if she had already become an administrative problem rather than a person standing 3 feet away. Caro hesitated only long enough to look uncomfortable, then held out his hand. Rowan unclipped the civilian badge from her belt and placed it on the counter beside the untouched glass. The badge carried no rank, only her photograph, the words Transit Canteen, and a blue stripe that permitted movement through the terminal after midnight. Sorn took it before Caro could. You will remain in the service corridor until security clears you. Outside, wind crossed the abandoned apron at 22 knots, driving salt rain beneath the old loading doors and pushing the temperature down to 9 degrees Celsius. The terminal had been built 30 centimeters above the flood line marked on the original plans. Tonight, the water had reached within 5. Rowan followed Caro through the kitchen, past stacked ration crates, and a wall map yellowed at the edges. The route to the service corridor was 41 meters, but Caro radio lost signal twice in that distance, each dropout lasting just over 1 second. This place does that in bad weather, he said, almost apologetically. Rowan stopped near the map. A cable diagram had been pinned beneath it years ago, partly hidden by sanitation schedule. The line running behind the bar did not lead directly to the radar tower. It crossed into an obsolete fire suppression junction, then disappeared into a maintenance conduit routed under the apron. Who reopened conduit C? She asked. Caro looked at the diagram, then at her. No one. It was sealed after the western hangar flooded. Rowan traced the faded route with one finger, but did not touch the paper. If the conduit remained sealed, the relay should have been dead. If it had been reopened, there should have been a work order, a lock record, and a test notice. There had been none posted in the terminal. Caro radio clicked again. Sorn's voice ordered him to move Rowan away from all communications equipment and return to the bar. She is civilian staff, Sorn added. Treat this as a conduct issue. The phrasing was precise. Not a security breach. Not interference with operations. A conduct issue could be handled locally, written narrowly, and closed before morning. Caro shifted his weight. You heard him. Rowan continued down the corridor without resistance. But the next doorway, she saw a maintenance cart parked against the wall. One wheel was wet with black runway silt, while the other 3 were dry. The cart's odometer showed 6.2 kilometers since reset, though the maintenance bay was less than 800 meters from the terminal. Someone had taken it beyond the building, through standing water, and returned it without logging the trip. In the holding room, a heater rattled beneath a frosted window. Rowan sat at the metal table while Caro stood outside, watching through the narrow glass. She could not see the bar from there, but she could still hear the old relay through the wall when it clicked again. 3.8 seconds later, Sorn's voice came over Caro radio, this time ordering the radar technicians to classify the event as weather noise. At 12:07 a.m., the holding room heater shut off, and the fluorescent light above Rowan began pulsing at a rate too regular to be caused by the storm. The wind had risen to 27 knots outside, driving sheets of salt water across the apron, yet the electrical rhythm inside the terminal remained exact. 5 seconds dim, 1 second bright, then stable again. Rowan counted 4 cycles before Caro opened the door and stepped aside for Petty Officer Miles Arden, a radar technician with Rain on both shoulders and a sealed maintenance pouch under one arm. Commander Sorn says you heard a duplicate alert. Arden's tone was careful rather than hostile. Rowan looked at the pouch. The tamper strip was intact, but the printed issue time read 23:39 for minutes before the first relay click. I heard one alert on 2 paths, she said. Arden frowned. The system logged a weather echo. He placed the pouch on the table and pulled out a diagnostic slate. Its screen showed 3 incidents from the previous 72 hours, each marked as intermittent sensor contamination. The listed intervals varied by less than 1/10 of a second. Rowan leaned closer without touching the device. The first event showed 3.7 seconds between raw contact and command display. The second, 3.8. The third, 3.8. What does your baseline allow? She asked. Up to 1.2 in heavy weather. Arden answered before realizing he had answered too quickly. Caro glanced through the door toward the corridor. The terminal's backup generator vibrated under the floor, a low-frequency Rowan could feel through the metal chair legs. Arden scrolled to a 4th line, then stopped. That entry had been deleted from the visible log, but remained faintly cached beneath the interface. Its time matched the receipt Rowan had hidden under the register. That one should not be there, he said. Rowan studied the coordinate field beside it. The displayed contact sat 186 meters east of runway 9, over flooded pavement where no aircraft could operate, but the raw return showed a positional spread of only 14 meters, too narrow for the label assigned to it. She did not claim certainty. The signal could still have been a ground vehicle, a reflected beacon, or bad data fed through a stable delay. Do you have 3 nights of raw buffers? Arden shook his head. Only tonight. The others auto-purged after classification. Then do not classify this one yet. Her voice stayed low enough that Caro had to lean in. Freeze the buffer, compare it to the mechanical receipt time, and check whether conduit C carried current. Arden looked toward the door again. That conduit has been dead for 6 years. Your wall says so. He did not like the distinction. His pulse showed at his throat, fast but controlled, perhaps 90 beats per minute. Rowan's own breathing remained even, though she knew her warning rested on incomplete ground. She had a repeated delay, a live conduit that was supposed to be dead, and a coordinate return that did not fit its label. She did not yet have proof of intent. Arden closed the slate. Commander Sorn has already ordered the event marked weather noise. Then preserve the raw file before the order reaches the archive. Caro radio crackled with Sorn's voice, instructing Arden to report immediately to the radar room. Arden gathered the pouch, but Rowan noticed he left the diagnostic slate on the table for half a second longer than necessary, its cache screen still open. Then he took it and walked out. 7 minutes later, from behind the locked door, Rowan heard the relay click again, followed not by a warning, but by the deep mechanical roll of an aircraft beginning to move somewhere beyond the flooded glass. The aircraft noise deepened beyond the storm, then shifted from west to east as Halden 3 turned toward runway 9. It was not taking off from breaker point. The engines belonged to an inbound aircraft, descending somewhere behind the rain and low cloud. Outside, the wind had reached 31 knots. Visibility had fallen below 700 meters, and the temperature was 8 degrees Celsius. Caro radio came alive with overlapping voices. Halden 3 is inbound to 9. One controller reported. Runway status shows clear. Rowan stood before Caro could tell her to remain seated. Through the narrow glass in the door, she saw the maintenance cart still parked against the corridor wall, but its ignition key was missing. The wet front tire had left a dark crescent on the concrete, and beneath the cart lay a strip of red survey tape coated with black silt. "Who has the airfield truck?" she asked. Caro pressed his radio closer to his ear. "Maintenance team, Delta. They were sent to inspect the south lights." "Which route?" "Runway 9 service lane." The relay clicked behind the wall. Rowan counted. 1 second. 2. 3. At 3.8, Caro radio delivered a new transmission. Vehicle Delta reports clear of active pavement. The aircraft's engine note continued moving east. Rowan looked at the wall map, then at the survey tape under the cart. The south light route did not cross the black silt drainage section unless the vehicle had entered the runway itself. She could not prove the truck was still there, but the timing was wrong, and the false coordinate from Arden's slate had been 186 meters east of 9, close to the flooded maintenance crossing. "Your status report is delayed," she said. "Delta may still be on the pavement." Caro's jaw tightened. "They just called clear. You heard the process call." The distinction landed harder now. A controller shouted over the radio that Halden 3 had begun its approach turn, descending through 400 meters while the command display still showed runway 9 open. Caro reached for the door release. "I need to get to operations. Take me to the service intercom." He looked at her as if the request violated every instruction he had been given. Then the terminal lights dipped, the backup generator surged, and Sorn's voice cut across the net, ordering the aircraft to continue. "No further delay. 9 is clear." Caro opened the door. They moved 23 meters down the corridor to a wall-mounted emergency panel older than either of them. Its speaker carried the raw field channel before the central network compressed and routed it. Rowan pressed the listen switch. Static filled the corridor. Then a strained voice broke through from Vehicle Delta. "We are not clear." "Repeat, not clear. Water stalled us at the east marker." The transmission reached Sorn's command net 3.8 seconds later, but by then Halden 3 had already committed to the approach. Rowan did not touch the transmit key. Caro did. He relayed the raw warning and ordered the runway status changed to occupied, only to have Sorn countermand him within seconds. On the other side of the terminal glass, landing lights emerged through the rain, low and white, then vanished behind a sheet of spray. The controller called for an immediate abort. The aircraft climbed away without touching down, its engines rising into the night after a delay that felt longer than the numbers allowed. Vehicle Delta remained stranded, but intact, near the flooded marker. No collision occurred. No one was hurt. Yet the margin had narrowed to a handful of seconds built on data Sorn had declared trustworthy. Caro stared at the emergency panel, breathing hard. Rowan watched the indicator lamp pulse once, then return to green. Somewhere in the radar room, someone began deleting the warning that had arrived first. The controller's abort call had prevented the immediate disaster, but Vehicle Delta was still trapped 214 meters east of the runway centerline, with water climbing around its wheel housings and the field network reporting 3 different positions. Sorn ordered all communications routed through operations, a decision that sounded orderly and made the raw signal harder to verify. Rowan watched the emergency panel's green lamp pulse out of sequence, then looked at Caro. "We need 1 clock, not 1 commander." Caro brought her into the old dispatch room, a narrow compartment containing a mechanical weather recorder, a paper strip printer, and a wall chart marked with drainage elevations from before Breaker Point had been modernized. The room temperature was 11 degrees Celsius, and condensation had silvered the inside of the window. Arden arrived 30 seconds later, carrying the diagnostic slate against his chest. "The main display moved Delta 60 meters north," he said. "The driver says they never moved." Rowan did not claim the slate was wrong. She asked for the last raw voice transmission, the receipt clock reference, and the weather recorder's pressure marks. 3 sources, all independent, placed the vehicle near the east marker before the process system shifted it. The 3.8-second delay had not merely postponed the message. It had attached the message to a newer coordinate packet, creating the appearance that the truck had cleared the pavement. Outside, the wind held at 30 knots, gusting higher across the exposed apron. Water flowed downhill at a shallow 2-degree grade toward a drainage trench that had been marked inactive on current maps. Rowan compared the old chart with the red survey tape recovered from the maintenance cart. The tape had black silt on one side and pale salt residue on the other, indicating the cart had crossed the trench edge and returned by a different surface. "There is still a raised maintenance spine beneath the water," she said. "Not wide, but continuous." Arden studied the chart. That route was removed from the digital map. The concrete was not. Caro relayed only the verified location and the existence of a higher surface to the rescue crew, leaving route selection to the field supervisor. Rowan stayed with the timing records, aligning each voice fragment against the paper strip rather than directing movement outside. The distinction mattered. She was not commanding the rescue. She was removing the false data that had boxed it in. 7 minutes later, the crew reported visual contact with Delta from the elevated maintenance spine. For minutes after that, the stranded driver confirmed the water had stopped rising. The aircraft remained in a holding pattern offshore, its fuel margins still acceptable, while Breaker Point closed runway 9 and shifted all activity away from the flooded sector. No applause followed. Arden simply looked at Rowan differently, measuring the distance between her civilian badge and the precision of what she had done. "Maritime support?" he asked. Rowan adjusted the paper strip so the 3 timestamps remained visible. That was one line on the form. Before he could press further, the diagnostic slate flashed a maintenance alert. Someone in operations had issued a remote purge command for the raw radar buffer, scheduled to execute in 90 seconds. Arden's face tightened. Caro reached for the network cancel function, but Rowan stopped him from touching it. "Do not touch the purge," she said. "We already have independent records." She indicated the paper strip and the mechanical recorder. The central system could erase its own version of the night. It could not erase what had been recorded outside it. The purge countdown reached 0, and the diagnostic slate wiped its active buffer clean, Arden watched the final data line collapse into a blank gray field, then looked at Rowan as if expecting disappointment. She was already aligning the records that had survived outside the central network. The purge had removed one version of the night. It had not altered the receipt stamped at 23 hours, 43 minutes, and 16 seconds, the pressure recorder's ink trace, or the emergency panel's audio. "Let finish," Rowan said. 43 seconds later, Sorn entered the dispatch room with 2 security personnel and a Halden Systems manager named Victor Pell. Rain darkened the commander's shoulders, but his voice remained measured. He announced that the near incident had resulted from a weather-related sensor fault, unauthorized civilian interference, and Caro premature change to runway status. Pell supported the explanation with a printed maintenance report claiming Conduit C had remained electrically dead throughout the night. Rowan looked at the page, then at the black silt drying on the survey tape. The report's inspection time was 0:31, 14 minutes after Vehicle Delta had stalled and 9 minutes before the maintenance crew had returned to the terminal. "Who performed this inspection?" she asked. Pell answered that an automated continuity test had done so remotely. Arden shifted beside the slate. Breaker Point's old conduit had no remote test module. Its last upgrade predated the software named on Pell's report by 7 years. Sorn ordered security to collect every device in the room. Caro requested written authority because the materials were now connected to a reportable runway emergency. That hesitation changed the geometry of the confrontation. Sorn could still command the room, but he could no longer pretend no one else understood what was being removed. Rowan placed the 3 paper records on the table in chronological order. The receipt showed the first relay click. The weather strip marked the same pressure fluctuation 3.8 seconds earlier than the command log. The emergency audio captured Vehicle Delta, saying it was not clear before the central network paired the call with a newer coordinate. None proved corruption alone. Together, they proved the official sequence was physically impossible. Pell reached for the receipt, but Rowan slid a transparent food service sleeve over it before he touched the paper. "Chain of custody," she said. Sorn's composure thinned. He accused her of fabricating expertise and demanded her sealed personnel history from the base archive. Rowan did not object. She only asked Arden to reopen the deleted incident index. Not the erased radar data, but the classification history stored separately for billing and equipment uptime. That record had not been convenient to find. Arden had noticed its mismatched storage code during the crisis and spent 11 minutes tracing it through the maintenance accounting system. 3 previous weather echoes appeared, each linked to a Halden aircraft window and each reclassified by Sorn within 6 minutes of detection. The same 3.8-second offset marked every event. A 4th entry contained an attachment Arden had nearly missed. A deferred employment memorandum naming Sorn as Halden's regional operations director after his retirement. The offer remained conditional on Breaker Point completing the current flight program without a reportable safety failure. Beneath it sat the payment authorization for emergency relay servicing, issued before the first supposed fault had occurred. Pell stopped speaking. Sorn had not delayed the warnings to protect the airfield. He had delayed them to protect the job waiting for him after it. Sorn tried a different explanation, claiming the contractor had installed a temporary safety buffer with verbal approval. Caro asked where that approval had been recorded. Sorn said operational necessity had not allowed paperwork. Arden then opened the conduit access. Register. The seal on Junction C had been signed out under the badge number of a technician who had been ashore on medical leave for 9 days. The forged entry had not appeared from nowhere. Rowan had noticed the wet maintenance card. Arden had preserved the classification index, and Caro had refused to surrender the room without written authority. Each small resistance now locked into the next. Outside, the wind dropped below 24 knots, and the stranded truck reported safe recovery. Inside, Sorn ordered security to detain Rowan for unauthorized access. The senior guard looked at the evidence sleeve, then at Caro written incident notice, and declined until legal review arrived. Rowan's civilian badge still lay in Sorn's pocket, but the balance of authority had shifted away from it. When the base archive finally returned her personnel query, the screen displayed only one readable line beneath pages of sealed service history. NORTHLINE, Signal Integrity Authority, special access required. The closed review began at 2:18 a.m. in Breaker Point's former flight planning room, where 3 clocks showed 3 different times and rainwater tapped through a ceiling seam into a steel bucket. Lieutenant Commander Vin from Regional Legal Command chaired the session by secure link, while an aviation safety auditor, a communications warrant officer, Caro, Arden, Sorn, Pell, and Rowan sat within view of the recording system. No one had arrived to commend anyone. Their task was narrower: determine why an occupied runway had been certified clear, why raw warnings had been delayed by 3.8 seconds, and why someone had attempted to erase the underlying records. Vin began with the physical evidence rather than testimony. The receipt printer showed 23 hours, 43 minutes, and 16 seconds. The isolated emergency audio placed the first relay tone at the same moment. The central command log registered the warning at 23 hours, 43 minutes, and 19.8 seconds. The pressure strip confirmed the backup power fluctuation associated with the relay before the networked clock advanced. Could weather produce that sequence? Vin asked. The communications warrant officer studied the synchronized display for nearly a minute. Weather can disrupt the signal. It does not repeatedly hold unrelated events for the same interval and then attach them to newer coordinate packets. Sorn argued that the relay buffer had been installed as a safety measure during storm operations. Vin asked for authorization. He produced none. Pell claimed Halden had acted under verbal direction, but the billing index showed the contractor had invoiced Breaker Point for emergency relay servicing 19 hours before the first officially reported fault. Arden then presented the separate classification history he had recovered from the maintenance accounting archive. 3 previous alerts had been downgraded to weather echoes, each aligned with an unlisted Halden movement. Each carried the same 3.8-second displacement. Caro submitted his written incident notice and described hearing vehicle Delta report that it remained on the runway before Sorn ordered the approach to continue. Rowan spoke only when Vin asked how she had identified the delay. The first sound and the reported sound did not belong to the same clock, she said. Everything after that was verification. Vin turned to the security recording. The image showed Sorn ordering the camera disconnected, Rowan preserving the receipt, and a strike across the counter. Sorn called it a disciplinary reaction to interference. Vin classified it instead as possible intimidation during evidence preservation and added it to the referral without allowing the review to become a trial of character. Vin asked the warrant officer to examine the single line the archive had already released. When NORTHLINE appeared on the review screen, his posture changed. He knew the name, not as a person, but as the origin designation behind a signal verification standard still taught to senior communications auditors. Vin authorized the release of only one additional fact. Rowan Keene had qualified as a Navy SEAL before leading the compartmented cell that created that standard. 3 commands had adopted its procedures after NORTHLINE identified timing manipulations that conventional audits had cleared. Arden looked from a screen to the bartender's gray shirt. Rowan's history explained how quickly she had recognized the pattern. It did not replace a single piece of evidence on the table. At 3:06, Vin suspended Sorn's operational authority, restricted Pell and Halden personnel from all systems, and ordered the relay hardware, access logs, and payment records placed under independent custody. Sorn was not arrested in the room. He was removed from the command chain, his credentials disabled, and his case transferred for formal investigation. Before the session ended, the warrant officer isolated Conduit C and removed the unauthorized buffer. For the first time that night, all 3 clocks were reset against the same independent reference. At 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds, they advanced together, and Rowan watched Sorn realize that the system no longer contained a place for his missing 3.8 seconds. By 6:40 a.m., the storm had moved 12 kilometers offshore, leaving Breaker Point under a pale strip of winter light and a wind reduced to 14 knots. Runway 9 remained closed behind portable barriers, Conduit C sat under evidence seal, and every Halden terminal displayed the same red notice. Access suspended pending review. Commander Everett Sorn was escorted from the operations wing without restraints and without ceremony. Regional Command had frozen his credentials, removed him from flight authority, and referred the altered logs, falsified access entry, and contractor payments to separate legal and procurement investigations. Victor Pell left through another door under an order barring him from all military systems. The process was slower than revenge and harder to reverse. Rowan returned to the transit canteen, wearing the same gray shirt she had worn when Sorn struck her. The swelling along her cheek had faded to a narrow shadow. Caro placed her civilian badge on the counter, recovered from Sorn's personal effects, but she did not clip it back onto her belt. Arden arrived, carrying the mechanical receipt clock and the old wall unit whose network correction had concealed the repeated 3.8-second shift. Regional wants the receipt clock transferred to the evidence archive, he said. Rowan checked the seal number against the custody sheet before handing it over. Then it goes with the original paper roll. Arden nodded. He had stopped asking questions about NORTHLINE. The release page had answered enough and made clear how much remained closed. Lieutenant Commander Van appeared on the canteen monitor at 7:05 and offered Rowan a temporary position with a regional signal assurance office. The appointment carried independent authority, access to disputed timing cases, and no requirement to reopen the rest of her service record. Rowan read the order once. "No," she said. Van studied her for a moment, then withdrew the document without argument. NORTHLINE had returned for one night because an honest warning had been buried. By morning, the name belonged behind a sealed door again. Outside, a maintenance crew removed the unauthorized relay hardware from the service conduit. Inside, Caro mounted a replacement clock above the register and connected it to an independent reference rather than the airfield network. At 7 hours and 12 minutes, the new clock advanced. The receipt printer advanced with it. Arden's handheld display matched within 200ths of a second. Rowan watched 3 more intervals pass before pouring the first coffee of the morning. A junior technician at the end of the bar recognized her from the security recording and looked briefly at the fading mark on her face. "They really did not know who they put their hands on," he said. Rowan set the cup in front of him and adjusted the receipt so the timestamp faced upward. "They did not need to know who I was," she replied. "They needed to know the clock was honest." The printer clicked once, clean and immediate, with no missing 3.8 seconds left for anyone to hide inside. If quiet discipline means more to you than loud glory, please like and subscribe. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental.